Hello everyone, I'm Colin Kinnett. Today we're finally getting around to making some little saddle clamps for my table saw, and I'm going to show you how to use them too, so stick around and let's get started. Now some of you will be wondering, why would you even bother making saddle clamps? There's many different ways of doing stop and start blocks on a table saw. For example, you can use just a plain old block of wood with different clamps, a couple of clamps, one at the front, one at the back. You can even use these wooden clamps. They'll work fine. Sometimes they're not as secure and you've always got a piece sticking out here. And the reason is, for those of you who follow my channel, which reminds me, if you're not following my channel, I invite you to subscribe to it. But for those who are following my channel, if you remember back a few weeks ago, I was doing some stop and start cuts on the table saw, and I was using this method. And for some reason, I forget what it was now, but even this was getting in the way of something. So it was at that time I thought, I do enough stop and start cuts on the table saw. I need to make some proper saddle clamps for the fence. So that's what we're going to do. Now I have some good quality recycled plywood that I'm going to use. I need to make a couple of plates that are going to be this height. And I've got a couple of 5-inch bolts, and I'm putting them down because I need to get the height because they're going to be underneath. So all I'm going to do now is measure this, and that's 3 3/4 inches. That's all I need to do to get started. Okay, so that's given me each side. What I need to measure now is the distance between, and this number is pretty critical, and that's 3 3/16. So let's go ahead and cut one of those. So there's our 3 pieces that we have. Now, what I'm going to do, I've got these bolts that I'm going to put underneath. So the plywood's going to be above and the bolts will be underneath. So the next thing I need to do is drill holes for the bolts to go through. So I'm going to make the Forstner bit cuts first of all, then I'll make the through cuts. And now I'm going to drill through holes for each of those where those bolts are going to go through. So there's a little bit of a dry fit to see how it's all coming together. Eventually I'll put a screw in here to fasten that on there. But what I'm looking at right here is, if you'll notice this bolt here, there's a reason I picked bolts, so that when I move this back and forth, it's not only not going to mark my aluminum fence, it's not going to get chips of aluminum eventually coming off, because that's what thread will do when you move it back and forth. So I need to drop this down because you can see it's a little bit high. And I did that on purpose so that I could cut a little bit off the bottom. And that's what I'm going to do right now. And you can see when you move the fence, when it's all clamped down, well, it's not doing it now, but there, you can see how when it's right on the table saw top, when you move it back and forth, when you're clamping and you're doing different slots at different widths, that will catch on there, and the way to get around that, of course, is to lift that just slightly off the table saw top. So that's what I want to do next. I'm going to measure this and make some cuts until these bars are resting on the fence and the bottom of this jig is just slightly off the tabletop. There we go, that's perfect. The bars are riding on the fence and the bottom is just slightly off the tabletop. Now I've taken a moment to sand all the inside pieces of this clamp, and I've cut some anti-skid material, and you can see that it's very, very thin. Now normally I use double-sided tape, but I've discovered that I have some very small staples. And when I staple this in, they actually are flush. So it still allows the anti-skid material to be proud of the staple. So I'm going to try that, and if that doesn't work, I'll be able to do something else later on. Double-sided tape or some spray adhesive will work. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is just put the tops on. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure if we really need these, but I've already cut them. And the purpose of them is to be sort of a pivot point so that when we crank this down, they're going to. But with the anti-skid material on there, I don't know if it's really going to make a difference. But I already have them cut. So all it is a couple holes and a couple of screws to hold them on there. And if nothing else, it'll just be an easier way to grab these to put them on and off. So I'm just going to do that off camera. And when we come back, we'll put the bolts in. Okay, I'm going to put the bolts in now, and I'm going to use CA glue to fasten them down. I've got this clamped so that it doesn't move around on me, and I'm using, as you can see, I'm using the medium thick here, and all I'm going to do is just put a light, just a bead around where that bolt's going to go, and now all I'm going to do now is just sort of spritz the underside of the bolt. And when you put that in, you need to make sure you seat it right away, just like that. And that's all there is to it. Do the next one. And that will fasten down just really firmly. And spritz that one. There we go. Now the other thing that you can do, and I am going to do, is you can actually put a little, you can often put, there's usually a little bit of a gap in there, and you can usually put a little bit of CA glue in that, and that will just help seal that as well. So I'm going to do that as well, and just spritz that. And I'll go on to the next one and do the same thing. Of course, one of the keys to making this jig work is to be able to glue those heads in so the bolts don't turn. I'll put a link to where you can get some fresh CA glue, and if you keep it in the fridge, it'll keep up to 18 months, so it's a really good deal. Well, okay, now comes the moment of truth, and I've got some washers and some wing nuts for them. I need a couple more wing nuts. Let's just try these and see if that's going to fit. And I did, there we go. There we go. I didn't get enough wing nuts there. I need a couple more, but there we go. Now I don't have to tighten that super tight. Oh, look at that. That's just super snug on there. That's exactly what I'm looking for. All right, I'm going to cut a couple more wing nuts and we'll put this one together. There we go. Well, and there's my two saddle clamps, and I've made them wide enough so they'll go right to the end, almost to the edge of the table. You can't even see it in that clip there. And of course they ride back and forth nicely. I can clamp them down anywhere, and they're nice and firm. I've just checked them. They clamp really, they're really tight on there. They're not going to move. And here's the part I like the best. You can actually move back and forth move the fence back and forth, and it doesn't catch in the miter slot. So when you're making multiple different slots, starts and stops, you don't have to worry about it. So anyway, let's give it a quick whirl here and see what it works like. Well, that concludes my video for today, making stop blocks for the table saw.